With it being Father's Day, we're going to take a week off from our questions for God, although you could look at this and say, what makes a good dad? So if you wanted a question for today, you could say, what makes a good dad, and we'll talk about that. But with it being Father's Day, I figured I would share some Father's Day jokes with you. I saw an article that had 40 dad jokes. You know, dad jokes, the jokes that you shouldn't really tell anybody, but dads usually tell people those jokes. So if you tell these jokes, I'm going ahead and tell you not to tell them anymore. So if you hear a joke and you've shared that joke before, just go ahead and take that one and put it off to the side. You don't want to share that one anymore. And y'all are like, okay, what jokes are we talking about? So here we'll start out with just a few of them. How can you tell if a pig is hot? It's bacon. Now, if y'all laugh, then I'm all right, what did the beach say to the tide when the tide came in? What did the beach say when the tide came in? Long time no see. Told you, if you hear these, then that means you shouldn't tell these to anybody. Why should you not use an unsharpened pencil? Because it's pointless. And somebody came up with these. Why do turkeys play the drums? They have drumsticks. What do you call a happy cowboy? A Jolly Rancher. Why did the football coach go to the bank? To get his quarterback. All right, for your fishermen out there, where do boats go when they're sick? To the dock. All right. Want to hear a joke about construction? Sorry, I'm still working on it. I would tell you they get better, but they don't. All right. A few more. Where does 007 invest his money? In the bond market. What do you call, this is for all my hunters out there, what do you call a deer with no eyes? What do you call a deer with no eyes? No eye deer. I know. Yeah, they're corny. They're corny. All right, this is what all of y'all should have done this morning. Where do you learn to make ice cream? Sunday school, right? Sunday school. You'll get it eventually. All right. How did the pirate get such a good price on his ship? It was on sale. What do you call an angry golfer? You're going to see that later on if you watch the U.S. Open. But what do you call an angry golfer? Teed off. Why did the bank teller push the customer? He wanted to check his balance. All right, I'm going to end it. Just a couple of more, we'll end it. All right, how do birds learn how to fly? How do birds learn how to fly? They wing it. All right, I told you a couple more. Which one do I want to do? All right, we'll end with this one. This one's good. How did the cow go to Hollywood? Or why did the cow go to Hollywood? To be in the movies. All right, so if you use those jokes, throw them away, all right? Those are not good jokes. But we come today to celebrate Father's Day. And I wanted to look at Father's Day a little bit different this year than I normally do. Because normally I just talk about fathers, but there's a large group of blended families in the U.S. Did y'all realize that? I was looking at the stats from the Step Family Foundation, and they said that 1,300 new step families are formed every day. Every day, 1,300 new step families are formed. They also said over 50% of U.S. families are remarried or recoupled. So I wanted to look at a story that showed a blended family in the Bible. So this morning we're going to look at a father to a young woman who needed a father. Her father had passed away and she needed a father. And he stepped up to the plate. We'll be in Esther today, the book of Esther. So hit Psalms, go back a couple of chapters or a couple of books, and you'll be right there at Esther. But we're going to look at the book of Esther this morning. So our big idea on your listening guide is the role of being a father can change as life changes. The role of being a father can change as life changes. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to read from chapter 1 of Esther. And it says now, chapter 1, verse 1, now it took place in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces. In those days, King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne, which was in the citadel of Susa. In the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all of his princes and attendees, and the armies and officers of Persia and Media, and the nobles and the princes of his provinces being in his presence. And he displayed the riches of his royal glory and splendor of his great majesty for many days, 180 days. And when these days were complete, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days for all the people who were present at the citadel of Susa, from the greatest to the least, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. Well, the first point on your listening guide is being a good father is a choice. Being a good father is a choice. Now, let me give you background information because I can't read the whole book of Esther. We'll be here for a few hours, and I know y'all have plans, so I'm going to give you the cliff notes of it. Sound good? Cliff notes of it is that King Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, depending on which translation you have, he was the king of Persia and Media. It's a huge one. It says, verse 1, that it was from India to Ethiopia, had 127 provinces. And he has a banquet, and the banquet was off and on for a total of 180 days. And at the end of the 180 days, he had a 7-day banquet. And this 7-day banquet, it was 7 days straight of drinking is basically what happened here. The men were on one part, the women were with the queen, Vashti. So the men, they're all together, they're drinking, they can drink as much as they want. And then on the last day, the king decides that he wants to show off his queen. So he calls for Vashti to come, and Queen Vashti said, no. I'm not coming in there with all those men that have been drinking for 7 days straight. It's not happening. Well, at this point in time, the king, he says to his wise men, what should I do? And they said, well, here's what we think, because if you think about it, the queen is having a banquet for all the women that are there. The king's having a banquet for all the men that are there. So the women now know that the queen said no. And the wise men said, well, you can't tell. You've got to do something, because if you don't do anything, then all of our women are going to start not doing what we want. They'll refuse what we're asking them to do. So then the king said, well, I'm going to just end her as being queen. So he sends out a letter to the whole kingdom saying that Queen Vashti is no longer the queen. And then he follows that up with another letter, and the next letter basically said that I need to find a new queen. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to send all the young virgins to the palace, and then I will pick a queen from all of them. That's basically the first chapter of the book of Esther. That's where we find Esther and Mordecai. Chapter 2, verse 5. Let me read to you verse 5 through verse 7. It says, now there was at the citadel in Susa a Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shemiel, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been taken into exile from Jerusalem with the captives, who had been exiles with Jenoniah, the king of Judah, from Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had exiled. And he was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had no father or mother. Now the young lady was beautiful of form and face, and when her father and her mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. Now we don't know what happened to her parents. They could have died as they were going into exile. They could have died in exile. We don't know. We just know that they had passed away and that she needed somebody to step in. And we see at the end of verse 7, it says that Mordecai took her as his own daughter. Mordecai chooses to be a father to Esther. And we find out that he was a good father to Esther. Life happened. Esther needed a father to step in. And Mordecai steps in that role. And all of a sudden, you now have a blended family. It plays out in our world every day. Things happen when you have parents that have to step in to help out with others. You have grandparents that have to step in and help out with others. But Mordecai chooses to be a father, and he chooses to be a good father. Because there's a difference between being a father and a good father, right? A father is just biological father, right? And that father could be good, that father could be bad. Mordecai, he chooses to be a good father. It's a choice that each parent has to make, whether I'm going to be a good parent or a bad parent. Our society today says a good parent is that you let your kids do everything. That's actually a bad parent, because you're not preparing your kids to go out into this world. Do you realize that parents have great influence over their children, or at least they should have great influence over their children? But they need to decide whether that influence will be a good influence or whether that influence will be a bad influence. Now, last week we were on vacation, and I was around a whole bunch of parents, and it was all hot, and I got to see the interactions of parents with their kids at all different levels. And some parents were good, and they were reaffirming, and also they were stern with their kids, and they had limits for their kids. And then there were others, and they were basically, some would just let them do whatever. Others, they were teaching their kids every word that you don't want your kids to hear in that situation. And so you had good ones that I saw, and I had bad ones that I saw, all in a week's time, all different exposures. And I said, oh, I could have a lot of illustrations for today. But I'll just say some were good, some were bad. But you, as a parent, and I would say even as a grandparent, because your influence goes further than just your kids, but it goes to your grandkids, you have to decide, are you going to be a godly influence in their lives? Because the world is not going to teach them about God, or the world is going to teach them that either there is no God, or God can be whatever you want it to be. So if you're looking to the world to teach your kids about God, it's not going to happen. That falls on you. And part of that influence is being there for them in the good times and the bad times. And we'll see as this story plays out that Mordecai, he was there for Esther at all times throughout the story. And it can be as simple as just spending family time together. I can remember as the kids were growing up, we had family soccer games. And it was Ashlyn and myself playing John Michael and Shannon. Now, those are some fun times because Shannon and soccer really don't go together. And Ashlyn was too small that she couldn't keep up with her brother. So, Ashlyn, I hate to tell you, but we always let you score. We put you right there in front of the goal so that you would score. And I would kick the ball to her, and I would say, John Michael, let her score. Don't. And we were all there together. Then we had family kickball games. And I usually ended up running all over the place trying to catch the ball, that it was going all over the place. But it was small things like that. It was small things like when Ashlyn went through this phase where she liked bedtime stories, and the bedtime stories she wanted weren't out of a book. She wanted me to make every bedtime story up. Now, you try that, doing that for about 4 or 5 months straight, and she would tell me, Dad, you've told me that story. And I'm like, how can I keep coming up with stories that she'll know? But that's just a small thing, is being a good influence by just being there for them, letting them know that you love them and that you care about them. But also the other influence is when they have those bad days where it seems like everything goes wrong and you're right there for them. And you're like, well, tell me about it. If there's anything I can help you with, I will, but you're just there so that they can express how they feel, what's happened in their life that day. Because you choose to be there. You choose to plug in at that point in time and to be a godly influence. It's also a choice of the parents that you choose to tell them about Christ because this world won't tell them. You choose to tell them that He came to live the life we couldn't, that He came to pay for our sins by dying on the cross, and that He was raised from the dead to defeat death for us. You share the gospel with them because our world will not do that. Our world will not tell them that. Our world won't share that with them. So you choose to be a good father, and that is that you're sharing God with them. That's the thing that you choose to do. Mordecai chose to be a father, but not only a father, but he chose to be a good father. That leads to the second point on your listening guide. Being a good father never ends. Being a good father never ends. Now let me catch you up with the story because the story goes on a little bit further. So here's some more of the story. The letter goes out and all the women are brought in from 127 different provinces. Esther is chosen to go to the king. So she'll be there for 12 months during this beautification process. So it's going to take 12 months to make them all pretty before they go to the king. But look in chapter 2, verse 11. I like this verse. It says, every day Mordecai walked back and forth in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and how she fared. Every day he was there for her. Every day he was making sure she was good. She was at a distance now. His influence wasn't as strong as far as he didn't see her every day, but guess what? He was there for her every day. She knew she was loved because she could look out and see him walking back and forth, getting the reports about what had happened that day. Think about what she's experiencing at this time. Women from all over, from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces are all coming together. So she's seeing people that she's never seen before, influences that she's never had before, and then to know that Mordecai is out there and that he's right there for her the whole way through. When I looked at this part of the story, I actually thought about what we're kind of going through in our house. And a lot of y'all have already done it. But that is that our son now is at college. So he's out of the house as much. He's being influenced by others, but we also want to be an influence still with him. And so we still reach out to him. We still let him know we're there for him. Still let him know that we're praying for him. If there's anything that happens, just let us know. We're only like a phone call away. But just so that he knows, even though he's not at the house every night, that doesn't mean that he's not our son anymore. We're still there for him. And the same thing's happening here. Even though Esther's not at their house anymore, she's still their daughter. And they're still there for her every day. So check in with your kids every day. See how they're doing every day. Let them know that you care about them every day. We see here in verse 15 that Esther is well thought of. It says at the very last sentence of that paragraph, it says, Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. Meaning that she found favor, meaning that people liked her. I think it was a lot. One, God had a big hand in this. But two, I think it's the parents, Mordecai and his wife, the bringing up that they had there, the influence that they had on her, that also had a big deal with this. But then let me keep going in the story. The story goes on that Esther then was chosen to be queen. Now you would think at this point Mordecai could say, oh, she's queen. I'm done. I've done my job, right? She can start taking care of me. She's more wealthy than I am now. I'm just going to sit back and let her take care of me, and my job as a parent is done. I don't have to be a father anymore. But actually, it's the opposite. He's still taking care of her. In fact, he is out and he hears about a plot to assassinate the king. And now he's watching out for her, but not only her, but also the king, because the king is part of her. And so he wants to make sure that she's taken care of, which means the king's taken care of. So he reaches out and he tells her about the plot. Esther tells the king about the plot. The plot is found out, and it was true. And it's recorded that Mordecai helped. But he was continuing to watch out for her. He was continuously there for her. Our kids want reassurance that we're there for them and that we are there to take care of them through thick and thin, on their best days and their worst days. But then as the story goes along, we're introduced to Haman. Now Haman is, I would say Haman's the enemy in the story. Haman is promoted to second in charge of all 127 provinces. And so people are bowing down to Haman. Mordecai, one day, he's walking along. Haman comes up. Everybody else bows down. He doesn't bow down. Everybody's like, why aren't you bowing down? He said, well, I'm Jewish. Meaning I only bow down to one person. That's God. That's who I bow down to. Well, Haman hears about this, he gets upset about it, and he tricks the king into issuing an edict that on a certain day, all the Jews could be attacked and killed. No one knew that Esther was Jewish. Why? Because of Mordecai's influence. Look at verse 20 of chapter 2. Said, now Esther had not made known her kindred or her people, even as Mordecai had commanded her. For Esther did what Mordecai told her, as she had done when under his care. So she didn't tell anybody that she was Jewish. Mordecai hears of the edict, and the first thing he does is he tears his clothes, which was a sign of great distress, puts on sackcloth. And Esther's maidens, they hear about this, they see what's happening, they tell the queen wants to know what's happening. Turn to chapter 4, verse 1. It says, when Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city and wailed loudly and bitterly. And he went as far as the king's gate, for no one was to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. They come and they ask what's happening. He relays back to them that there's been an edict that all Jews are going to be killed on a certain day. Well, Esther, and then he asks Esther to do something. Esther sends back a message to him. Look at verse 11 of chapter 4. It says, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king, to the inner court, who is not summoned, he has but one law, and that he be put to death unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter that he may live. And I have not been summoned to come to see the king these 30 days. Well, they send that message back to Mordecai. Mordecai sends a famous message back. Look at verse 13. It says, then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not imagine that you are in the king's palace and can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this." Mordecai now is a father at distance. She's the queen, but he still has influence over her. He is saying that God has placed you here for this time, this place, and still has influence on what is happening. Look at Esther's reply, verse 15. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, nights or day. I and my maidens also will fast in the same way. And thus I will go in to the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and did just as Esther had commanded him to do. As our children get older, as our grandchildren get older, the way that we parent them change. Would y'all agree with that? Because it seems like you have less influence, but really you just have to change the way that you influence them. You don't stop being a parent when they get further away. You change the way that you're a parent, because you still are you've gone through more than what they have. You've experienced more life than what they have. And the thing is, then you share that with them as they hit those milestones that you've already hit. And you still become an influence for them each step of the way. But there's another thing that happens here. It says that Esther said to fast, don't eat or drink for 3 days. Now, when they fasted, they prayed. And she's asking to pray for me. And I think that is another thing that every parent has to do for their children. Pray for them. Not just early in life, but all throughout life. Even when they get out at a distance, you're praying for them. You're there for them each day, letting them know whatever comes your way, I'm here. But also you're praying for them. Even as they travel further away, even as life takes them a different way, you're praying for them that whole way. And not only are you praying for them, but you let them know you are. Because sometimes we just pray and then we're like, okay, well, I've accomplished that. Well, when was the last time you told your child, you told your grandchild that you prayed for them? Especially when they've come to you with something that's happening in their lives and you say, I prayed for you about this. When was the last time you did that? And see what influence that has on them. So as parenting changes, one thing that is a constant is we never stop praying for our kids. The way we influence them changes, but we never stop praying for them. You can follow Mordecai's parenting style here because he's parenting at a distance. He can't even go to see her, but yet he is still influencing and he's still being a parent at a distance. And he included prayer in that. Now, I won't make you read the rest of it. I'll give you the cliff notes for the rest. As Paul Harvey says, here's the rest of the story. Esther decides to have a party. They call it a banquet. So she had a banquet. She only invited 2 people. It was the king and Haman. She said, will y'all come to my banquet? They said, sure. They come in, they eat, they drink, they have a good time. The king says, what do you want? She says, I tell you what, if you come to my next one, I'm going to have one more banquet that I'll let you know then. He goes, okay, sounds good. Haman, you're invited too. Y'all are going to be the only ones. Haman walks out thinking, I'm special because the queen invited me to one banquet, now another banquet. This is great. And he's walking along, and on the way home, he sees Mordecai. He remembers him, he hates him, and he's gets home and he says, the queen said all this about me, and she invited me to another banquet, and then I had to go see Mordecai. Family said, well, go build some gallows, and that way, if you're doing that great, you'll just have him hanged one day. So he builds gallows in front of his house, ready to have Mordecai hang. That night, the king can't sleep. Any of y'all ever had sleepless nights? He can't sleep. How many of y'all, when y'all get sleepy, you pull out a book to read to put you to sleep? That was him. He said, well, let me see how great my kingdom is. Can you read some past records so I know? And just so happened that they were reading that Mordecai had saved the king's life. And he looked over and he said, did I do anything for Mordecai? And they said, no. He said, well, I need to do something for him. The next day he asked Haman, he said, Haman, what should I do for somebody that did something for the king? Now Haman's thinking, he's talking about me. I'm second in command. What do I want to happen to me? He said, well, here's what you should do. You should put on your robe on that person. You should put a ring on that person. You should give them a donkey to ride through the streets, and then have somebody proclaiming as they go through the streets how great this person is because this person did something good for the king. King says, sounds great. Haman, I want you to do that for Mordecai. He goes on out. He has to do that. He has to walk through the streets yelling that the king said that Mordecai is a great person. He comes back to the banquet. He's there in the banquet. Everything's going great. King says, what is it that you need to tell me? She said, well, there's been an edict that's been issued that all of my people are going to be killed. He said, who did it? He said, Haman did it. King gets mad. He storms out. Haman goes over to the queen begging for his life. He trips and he lands on the couch right beside her begging for his life. And the king walks back in and says, oh, so now you're wanting to take my wife from me. And he has him hung on the gallows that Haman had built for Mordecai. Mordecai then takes his job, and that is the rest of the story. Our big idea today, Dad, be an influencer for your child's life. Dad, be an influencer for your child's life. I picked that word influencer because in social media, they have influencers. And they will tell you all about different things. Anything and everything that you want to look at, there's an influencer out there on social media for it. But you know who needs to be the biggest influencer? Is the parents and the grandparents that are leading their kids to Christ. So be an influencer for your child, for your grandchild. Regardless of how you became a dad, Mordecai wasn't the biological dad for Esther. But he chose to be the dad for Esther. And in the world that we live in and the family structures that we see all around, some people choose to be parents for kids that need parents. And if you choose to be that, then be an influencer to lead them to Christ. And that influencing changes as they go through life, but does it ever stop? No. You never stop influencing them. You never stop praying for them. You just change the way that you do it because you have to do it at a distance later on in life. But we're always called to be there regardless of what's happening, to be praying for them and to be an influence to them. So let me ask you, are you an influencer for your child, your grandchild? I know some of you great-grandchildren in there. But are you being an influence in their lives? Are you praying for them? And are you letting them know that you're lifting them up? If not, why not today? And maybe you've never accepted Christ, so you can't be an influencer on something that you don't know. And if that's the case, I'll be down front. Be glad to share with you how you can have a relationship with Christ. Last thing I'm going to ask us to do during the time of invitation, Talked about you being an influencer. Talked about prayer. During this time of invitation, why don't you pray for your children, for your grandchildren, for the ones that you have influence over right now, so that you go ahead and get into the habit of lifting them up in prayer. And then later on today, when they call you up, say, I just want you to know, I lifted you up in prayer. I'm just there for you, whatever you need. All right, let's close in prayer. Lord,